That's what Malcolm Gladwell wants colleges to do, shut down their football teams. Why? He makes a compelling case that is worth hearing. Listen into my conversation with the longtime New Yorker staff writer and best-selling author of The Tipping Point Outliers and the forthcoming book, David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. Malcolm Gladwell, pleasure to have you on.
It's good to be back.
What got you interested in football?
Well, I mean, for starters, I'm a football fan. And so but recently I've become aware of how, like many people, of how morally problematic being a football fan has become.
Why? What did you start noticing?
Well, I became all of this stuff on the sort of neurological consequences of potential neurological consequences of playing football has started to bubble up in the last couple of years. And that adds to a whole series of other concerns that have been around for much longer, which is that playing football at an elite level, in college or at the pro level, has all kinds of long-term health consequences. We know from doing long-term epidemiological studies that there's a rate of injury, a rate of disability, a rate of early death, all these kinds of things that are associated with both the massive weight gain and also the consequences of banging into each other on the field over and over again. Added to that now, there is all of this, I think, powerfully suggestive evidence that some portion of football players are going to come down with a serious degenerative neurological disorder known as CTE, which is directly the consequence of being hit in the head repeatedly over the course of playing football. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself as a fan, or as anyone who is in any way connected to football, is it appropriate in the modern day and age for us to support and participate in a game that has such a serious risk of physical harm to its players, right?
You compare football to dogfighting. Why?
Yeah, I did a piece for the New Yorker a couple of years ago where I said, this was at the time when Michael Vick was convicted of dogfighting. And to me, that was such a kind of, and the whole world got up in arms about this. How could he use dogs in a violent manner, in a way that compromised their health and integrity? And I was just struck at the time by the unbelievable hypocrisy of people in football, for goodness sake, getting up in arms about someone who chose to fight dogs, to pit one dog against each other. In what way is dogfighting any different from football on a certain level, right? I mean, you take a young, vulnerable dog who was made vulnerable because of his allegiance to the owner, and you ask him to engage in serious, sustained physical combat with another dog under the control of another owner, right? Well, what's football? We take young boys, essentially, and we have them repeatedly over the course of the season smash each other in the head, right? With known neurological consequences. And why do they do that? Out of an allegiance to their owners and their coaches and a feeling they're participating in some grand American spectacle. They're the same thing. And the idea that as a culture, we would be absolutely quick and sure about coming to the moral boiling point over the notion that you would do this to dogs, and yet completely blind over the notion you would do this to young men, is, to my mind, astonishing. Right? So there's a certain point where I just said, we have to say enough is enough.
And describe the neurological damage, because there are these studies, and you're right, they've proliferated over. It's really the last 5 years we have the critical mass of studies.
So what we have begun to do is there is a condition known as CTE, which was seen first in boxers and now has been seen in football players. Basically, it's been seen in any situation where people are repeatedly subjected to blows to the head. The difficulty with CTE is that it is, at the present time, can only be diagnosed upon autopsy. So we have no idea what percentage of living former boxers or present boxers or football players or hockey players are carrying around this kind of degenerative neurological disorder. it is a disorder which is similar but not identical to Alzheimer's. The difference being it has a different neurological consequence. It affects the brain in a different way, and it seems to be much more aggressive. So you can see neurological degeneration in ex-football players starting in their 40s or even their 30s. We've seen it in football players who were as young as 20 or 21. We've seen it in teenagers. There appear to be some percent of the population appears to be especially susceptible to it. So you and I could both play football, could both be hit on the head 10,000 times, and you could be totally fine, and I could suffer from this horrible condition in my 30s. So, and that's why when we see it in teenagers, we know that there must be an extreme form of susceptibility, which means that you only need to be hit on the head a relatively small number of times before you begin to show these symptoms.
And then you add to CTE, as you said, the other physical damage, having these very large, almost deliberately bulked up people.
Not almost deliberately bulked up. I mean, we're talking
crashing
about
into each other.
You can't play offensive linemen in the NFL now unless you are well over 300 pounds. We see linemen who are now 350 pounds. Well, these are people whose natural weight is probably 200, 210. So we're adding 140 pounds of playing weight over the course of 5 and 10 years. We're starting in high school. There are now high school offensive and defensive linemen who are north of 300 pounds. The long-term health consequences of that kind of extraordinary weight gain in your teens and 20s are known and devastating. I mean, if I were to say to you, I would like to take your children and I would like to double their weight over the course of the next 5 years so they could play a game, what would your reaction be? You would say, that's insane, right? Why would I do that to my child? And yet we're doing this routinely.
We're going to talk about what we can do about this in a realistic manner when we come back.